To the Knowing Show. I am your host, Christene Marie, and Merry Christmas to those of you joining in. I am so happy to be here with you. It is late Christmas night. It's around midnight, and it has just been such a wonderful day. My family is quite big. I have five brothers and sisters, and there are three sisters, two brothers, and my two brothers, they both have kids, and my eldest sister has two children, and then my youngest two sisters and I are all three single and no children. And we spent the day, my three sisters and I, with my parents, and it was just so special and so much fun. And it was really it was really life-giving, and I think that that's one of the most special things you can say about your family is when you actually go spend time with your family and you actually end up feeling like you get return on your investment, where you're showing up and you're giving energy in most every room we're all ever in, but then when we actually start finding that we get life back, there's something really fun about that when you're in a family where it's filled with so much fun and laughter and all the memories, but you end up actually walking away refreshed and restored. And so that today was just a really, really wonderful day. And it was our first time, where all of us were with our respective families. And then my parents and my sisters and I were all together while all of my siblings are with their families. And it was just very peaceful. And so it was really nice. I hope you had a wonderful Christmas too. Tonight, we are talking about the fifth habit of Christ. Over the last 4 days, we've been talking about different habits leading up to Christmas Day, the habits of Christ. And when I am talking about Christ, I'm talking about Christ that is effectively the power of God in every single one of us. Christ is an aspect of God, and he's all powerful and so incredibly potent. But when we think about, well, what does Christ look like? What does that mean? It's so easy to look at the Bible and see Christ is physically manifested in Jesus, the person of Jesus in the Bible. Jared Johnson, just saw you joined via YouTube. Thank you so much for joining tonight. Merry Christmas. So when we're talking about the habits of Christ, we're looking at the person of Jesus to be the representative of that for us. And so when I started doing this series a couple days ago, I first had this thought as I have spent a lot of time researching, and all of us do, coming to learn, like, what are the habits of those people that are so successful, and the people who make a lot of money, and the people who make a big impact in the world, global change. We study the way that they live and the way that they show up, because we want to either make similar impact or we want to have a similar life. And so I realized a couple weeks ago, I actually would love to study who is Jesus, um, for the purpose of how did he live? What were the habits that Jesus embodied that you and I can all embody, because we all have Christ in us? We all have the power of God in us. And so, what are the habits that Jesus executed on his time on earth so that we can embody those as well? Just want to take a quick moment and thank you all so much for joining. I'm just taking a note here. Devin's World on YouTube. Ryan, Spidey, thank you guys so much for joining tonight. Merry Christmas. I'm so happy you all are here. And so the habits that we've gone through thus far over the last 4 days, the habit number one, on Sunday, we talked about the fact that Jesus would actually pull away in the quiet of the morning every single day to pray and effectively get in alignment with his father. He would seek his father and ask his father, how do you want me to live today? What's your will? Because later on, Jesus said, I only ever do what I see my father doing. And so there was something about the early quiet, the stillness of the morning, where Jesus would go and pull aside and spend time with God. And it's a practice that I do for myself daily, which is what I call vertical alignment. And there's something about just kind of bringing myself into alignment with who God says that I am, my ideal, and just bringing in my mindsets, my beliefs, my behaviors, like everything that I do, act, believe, function into alignment under God. Like, I want to be operating under the guise of who God says that I am. My worth, my identity, everything is under that alignment, rather than being horizontally aligned, looking to the east and to the west, right and to the left. And I'm operating based off of how everyone else wants me to live. What are their expectations? How do they want me to be? Instead, I'm looking up to God vertically. I'm effectively, my compass is navigated north. And so that's habit number one. Habit number two that we explored on Monday was looking at the fact that Jesus was led by the Spirit. He was led from within. He knew the sound of God's voice. He knew what his Father sounded like versus what his voice sounded like, what fear sounded like, what shame sounded like. So he was really able to be led from within because he knew the voice of his Father, what his Father's call was for him on a day-to-day basis. And so he was able to be led accordingly. And then habit number three we looked at on Tuesday was we looked at, oh gosh, what was it? I actually wrote it down because I didn't want to forget. Oh, I loved this one. So habit number three that we looked at on Tuesday was the fact that Jesus constantly was teaching. So if Christ is activated in you and me, and Christ is in all, I I just saw you joined here. Good morning. Thank you so much for joining. It's evening for me, but good morning for you on YouTube. Jaden, thank you so much for joining. Y'all, the habit number three was really, really fun because the process of teaching is one that is something that Jesus really embodied ever since he was 11 years old. There's this verse where he was found in the temple with all these Pharisees and he was found teaching. And there's something about when we are doing the practice of habit number one, getting aligned, being taught by God, and then being led by God, we then can be taught via him speaking through us. And then what comes out of us is effectively from God himself. And so there's a confidence that we can take and have when we start sharing to other people. And it's not that we're teaching by way of, oh, I'm right, but it's teaching by way of, this is what I'm learning. And I want to share it with you because as we start teaching, we actually get to know things and secrets and mysteries at a much deeper level. And so habit number three was that Jesus was constantly teaching. And so because Christ is in you and me, the power of God is in every single one of us. Each one of us has access to these mysteries of who God is. That, man, if we were to really awaken God in us and Christ in us, we would be, all of us, having something really, really worthwhile to not just share and teach, but to really give freely as a gift and love to give that can really cover over, man, the grief and the turmoil and the pain that so many people experience, which leads to the fourth habit that we talked about yesterday, Christmas Eve, which is the fact that Jesus was so communal. He was so in community pretty much all the time. He was engaging with people, whether it was the people that were following him that were called the disciples in the Bible, or people who were frankly ostracized, which was that nobody really liked them. They were kind of on the fringes of society. They weren't really accepted, not really loved. And he would go and hang out with them without any fear or worry about what people would think about him. And he would even go and be with the religious people, even though the religious people, a lot of times, they were the ones that hated on him. And so Jesus had no walls up. Like, he was so open and so caring and loving to whoever was willing to come to him. So, this concept of Jesus was communal. It wasn't just that he was so open and willing to let anyone come to him, but by way of people being in his presence, they experienced healing because the presence of Christ always, when it's really Christ in us that people experience, man, they cannot help but be changed and be healed as a consequence because the power of God is so powerful. And so the power of God is so powerful. It's so alive, and so there's something about that if we're really tuned in with who God is and allowing him to be speaking through us, spending time with him, being led by him, talking like him and teaching like him, and sharing what he's showing us, then our presence at the end of the day brings healing and it brings life and it yields life. So, like I was sharing at the very beginning of this, being with my family over the last 24 hours this Christmas season has actually been really healing in some ways and really life-giving because Christ is activated in each one of them. And so there's something so cool that every single one of us has the opportunity to bring that type of presence to whoever we experience and whoever we encounter because Christ is in each one of us. So these are the habits that we've been talking about the last couple of days. And the fifth one, actually, my dad said, he was like, you have to talk about this habit, which I kind of love because it's not one that most people would talk about. But what we're going to be talking about tonight, this fifth habit of Christ, comes from comes from Matthew 11. And I just want to read it quickly. So Matthew 11, verse 9, it says, the Son of Man came eating and drinking, and they say, look at him, a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners. And my dad was like, you should talk about this as one of the habits. And I just loved it because I actually heard this verse. I guess I probably had read it growing up, but it just had never resonated up until 2 years ago. It struck me so, so profoundly because it is so easy for, honestly, I grew up in a very religious environment. And so it's really easy for people in the religious environment coming from that place to see other people and judge them. Like that's just kind of the MO, the modus operandi for a lot of religious places when it's, oh, I'm doing the right thing, you're doing the wrong thing. It's really hard to not see the world black and white when you have that lens. We talked about this over the last couple of days as we've been talking about these habits of we have a lens through which we view the world. And it's really hard to not look at it as black and white, right and wrong. But man, Jesus really engaged with people in a way that his lens was love. And he knew their hearts and he could see their hearts. He didn't look at their actions. And so, because he was looking at their hearts, he could engage with them human to human, not just what you're doing. And so, this comes down to a very fundamental level of do we have a clear identity of our being? Or is our being and our identity and our worth tied to just what we do? Because when that's the case, it's so incredibly hard for us to not have a black and white lens where it's, okay, I am the sum of what I do. My worth is tied to what I do. And just a quick note, I just wanted to head check. I just saw head check 3513. I just saw you said, can you pray for my cat? He has AIDS and cancer. I'm so sorry. I will definitely say a prayer for him. Let me know his name and I would love to pray for him. That's so sad. My sister actually has a really adorable cat and his name is Andre and he just like brings so much joy to my sister. So I'm so sorry that your cat has cancer. That's so sad. This concept of really having our worth and identity tied to who we are, not just what we do, changes everything as it pertains to how we show up and the manner in which we do, so that when we start encountering something that's really painful or something that's really hard, we are able to encounter it with a posture of almost courage and confidence because we have a strong foundation versus, man, if we're challenging and unsure of the core of who we are, man, that's going to be nearly impossible when you go through something challenging or something that's painful because then everything comes into question and we have no foundation to stand on whatsoever. But if we know who we are and we're confident in that and we know that our being is intrinsically tied to the God of the universe saying that we're worthy, man, okay, no problem. Like I can kind of face anything. And so with this whole question of tonight's habit, analyzing how Jesus would show up, and he was literally called a drunkard and a glutton because he would hang out with sinners, and he would probably drink a lot. And even his first miracle was to change water into wine. So Jesus had a good time and he literally hung out with people and he just like played. There's something too that I wanted to talk about tonight where Jesus understood play and fun to a level that I actually think each one of us could probably use a healthy dose of. We take life so seriously. And as adults, man, we just I'm around a lot of entrepreneurs a lot of the time where, we're all talking about our business and how can we grow it. And we're so fixated on how we can change and how we can make more money. And my gosh, it's really worthy for us to consider. When was the last time we really played? When was the last time we really took time to just be in the moment? And when's the last time we actually really took a moment in time to honor what we've done, living in the gain versus the gap? And so, with this habit of Christ that we're analyzing tonight, it speaks to the concept of our worth being tied to our being, where Jesus didn't look at people based off of what they did and what they had to show for themselves, but he looked at who they are. And then he allowed for his actions to be in accordance with that. He actually did not engage with the Pharisees, the religious people, the people who looked perfect from the outside, because he saw their hearts. But then he would engage with people who, because he saw their hearts, he would engage with people that maybe had more of a sketchy external front, where he got judged for that. And so Jesus was not, this habit of Christ in this regard is that he actually was not afraid of judgment. And he did not base his own worth based on other people's understanding or perception of him, because he knew he had a strong identity. He knew who God said that he was. He knew his worth. And so, because of that, because his being was so secure, he was so confident in that, then his doing, his external action could be so anti how most other people showed up and how most people acted. And he could do so with confidence. There's something about going against the grain. And there's something about going against how most people are operating in the world and being really brave and courageous in doing that. And I don't think that for me, I'm curious to hear from you guys here in the comments. Are we actually doing things that most other people don't? Or is most of our time, effort, and energy expended in ways that mirror the culture around us? And I think that I'm actually going to sit with that question. There have been a few times in my life where I felt like, oh, I'm actually doing something that does feel anti-cultural. But for the most part, we kind of all live really similar lives. And so if we want to have an impact that is significant or different, or where, man, the message that we preach, or I don't know, I guess I'm thinking about this as I'm going here, which I really love. It's fun to ideate and kind of think about this with you guys. If we want to live a life of true significance, if we want to live a life truly impactful, if we want to live a life that's different, we then need to be making different choices that probably would, at the moment, ostracize us and maybe make us stand out a little bit in a way that separates us and differentiates us from the rest of the world. And so, are we willing to pay that price? Are we willing to be different? Are we willing to maybe not have that sense of belonging for however long, for the sake of, at the end of the day, we've made the impact, or we've given the love, because Jesus made such a big impact. He made people feel so loved. He brought so much healing, but he had to be willing to face the judgment. And so, this question for all of us is, are we willing to be misunderstood? Are we willing to face judgment? Are we willing to have people question our actions and question our heart because of us being willing to go against the grain for a greater cause? Because we understand that our identity and our worth is not tied to what we do, but rather who we are. And so, at the end of the day, do we have a really clear understanding of who we are to begin with? So, I've loved this series, going through the habits of Christ. Thank you so much for joining me throughout this time. I I really, really, if I was to end with one thing, I think it's really just a reminder that you and I were made in the image of the Creator. And the created is beautiful and worthy to examine. And we do so for the purpose of love. Because as we go inward, as we come to know who God made each one of us to be, we then can love better. we then can love all the more. Our presence brings healing to ourselves and to other people. We do not ever need to be so reliant on other people to heal us, because we actually have God in us. We have Christ in us. Christ is alive in us so long as we choose. And so that forever makes us have a sense of courage and bravery, and also a sense of uh, ability to a responsibility, is, I guess, to go inward and take charge and ownership over ourselves in a way that perhaps we never did, because we just didn't understand that we have this treasure, this hope, and this hope is Christ in you and me, so that we're never alone at the end of the day, no matter how bad it gets, no matter how lonely it gets. This Christmas, I don't know for you guys if it was a first Christmas of celebrating this year without a loved one, or maybe this is the last one. I know that for my brother-in-law, before he was killed, we didn't realize in 2020 or 2013 that that was the last Christmas that we would spend together. And I know a couple years ago, I had a feeling like this might be the last Christmas that I shared with my former husband. And so we just never know. We never know when it's our last Christmas. So let's live each moment so fully, so that we don't live with regrets. Every single moment of our lives, we're creating our legacy. This moment is so precious, right here, right now. Just looking here at Harry Smith. Thank you so much for joining. I'm just looking here on YouTube at different folks who have joined. Thank you so much for coming tonight, y'all. This is such an important conversation. Who do we want to be? What's the legacy that we want to leave behind us? And do we actually believe that we're worthy and that we're loved here in this moment for who we are, not just what we do? And here's the thing: if we really believe that, what we do is going to be so impactful and change people's hearts and souls, and that their experience with us is going to be healing. So it's never ever being confident in who we are. Is that ever an excuse for doing in a way that's out of alignment, it never gives us an excuse to live poorly, right? It's actually a beautiful thing when we realize that we are made in the image of God, that we, the created, are made in the image of the Creator. We hold a greater responsibility than ever before to have our actions speak so loudly for the internal state of our souls, because we are loved. We have so much hope, and we have full autonomy over our life, that there's no excuse, and there's every reason in the world that we should live fully and freely. And so with that, thank you all so much for joining tonight. I just really am so grateful for each one of you, and I loved this series. And